If you think you know everything there is to know about Valentine's Day, think again. My name is Maggie Hannah Cohen. I'm a professional nutritionist from Seattle, Washington, and I'm 32 years old. On the night of February 10th, 2024, something happened that changed my life forever. During my short near-death experience, Jesus told me shocking facts about Valentine's Day, a holiday that millions of people love, but many don't understand. We have a very skewed view of love, affection, and partnerships because of what society has taught us. What he showed me was very different. But first, let me know where you are listening. Even though we're not together, it will be nice to feel closer. Don't forget to mark this story as liked and share your thoughts on what you thought about it. Let's talk about this in an honest way so we can all learn from each other. Have fun listening. For my study, I was hiking alone in the Olympic National Forest to make notes on rare medicinal plants. It got very cold very quickly, and I didn't understand how bad pneumonia could be until it was too late. As the cold crept into my bones, it stopped me from moving and slowed my heart rate. I had already crossed the line between life and death by the time relief teams found me. I had no idea the change would be so different. There wasn't a tube of light or loud music. There was a deep stillness and clarity that made the moment feel more real than any other in my life. Then he appeared. Jesus Christ, giving off a love that was so strong it was almost too much to bear. He told Maggie, "I need to show you something important about how my kids are being lied to." After that, I had a spiritual awakening that made me question everything I thought I knew about Valentine's Day. Jesus started by showing me visions of old Rome, but not as a romantic picture of history. Instead, he showed them to me as a real, unfiltered spiritual landscape. As I watched, the ancient holiday of Lupercalia took place. It was too much to handle the horrible rituals, the total lack of respect for human dignity, and the sexual immorality that was passed off as a religious celebration. Jesus said this is where the idea of Valentine's Day really came from. A gathering honoring fertility gods that is based on beliefs that have nothing to do with real love. He showed me complex spiritual links I didn't know about. The Roman gods, Venus and Cupid, the god Nimrod Pan, each of these symbols, which I had taken for granted, was actually a carefully constructed front that hid truly troubling spiritual roots. Jesus said, "My children will continue to follow traditions that have nothing to do with me." People celebrate a day thinking it's about love, but its roots are in something that goes against everything I teach. The spiritual insight was strong. Jesus told me about the change in history, and how the Roman Catholic Church strategically changed the name of the pagan Lupercalia holiday to make it look more Christian. I saw how a day that used to be full of sexual lottery, animal sacrifices, and fertility rituals was changed into something that seemed safe. He told me to look deeper, and all of a sudden I could see the spiritual darkness that was hiding behind the party. Being used for profit, feeling like you have to fit in, and having a limited view of love boiled down to one day of giving gifts. Jesus said that real love isn't about a day. True love is making a promise every day. Following my rules is true love. Serving others is what true love is, not following traditions that respect something other than me. The findings were very broad. I learned about the pagan gods that were connected to the event, like Lucus, who was the god of fertility, and Faunus, who was linked to Romulus and Remus. Jesus showed me that these old practices were not just interesting facts about the past, but ongoing spiritual tricks. But the philosophical insights about Valentine's Day were just getting started. Then Jesus started to carefully take apart every part of the holiday, showing spiritual lies that had been hidden for hundreds of years. "Let me show you the real beginnings," he said. And all of a sudden, I was taken back in time to see how this event, which seemed innocent at first, changed over time. I had a very clear and scary picture of the Roman holiday Lupercalia. Young men dressed as priests beat women with animal hides that had been used as sacrifices as they ran through the streets of Rome. The women would line up because they thought these horrible acts would make them fertile. It was nothing like the romantic holiday people enjoy today. There was sexual immorality, women were treated like objects, and there were raw pagan rituals. Jesus said this is where Valentine's Day really began. A holiday of fertility, honoring Lucas, Faunus, and our most basic needs. He showed me the complicated links I had never seen before. Nimrod, the ancient king who was often linked to rebellion against God, was at the center of these events. These ceremonies had a lot to do with Pan, the winged god of nature and sexuality. Every sign I had taken for granted, the red roses, the cherubic Cupid, and the whole romantic story, was a carefully planned spiritual trap. Do you get it now? Christ said, "This is not about love, it is about spiritual deception." I learned about Saint Valentine, or more accurately, I learned about how little we know about his life. Jesus talked about how the Catholic Church had changed the name of a pagan holiday to make it look more Christian. The many stories about Saint Valentine were just that, stories. There isn't a single historical person that can be linked to the holiday. He said, "My children have been led astray." People celebrate a day thinking it's about love, but its roots are in something that goes against everything I teach. It became painfully clear that the holiday was mostly about making money. I had visions of marketing efforts that were meant to make people feel bad, of people feeling like they had to show their love with expensive gifts every year. Every year, the average American spends almost $20 billion on one day, which has its roots in pagan fertility practices. Jesus pointed to a vision that was playing out in front of me. His eyes were filled with deep sadness. I saw the well-known Valentine's Day symbols: Cupid, the cherubic figure, the deep red roses, and the love traditions that are done every year. But when the scene changed, I saw where they really came from, and my heart sank with understanding. Jesus said, "That is not a little child without wings. He's not a loving angel." The picture of Cupid flickered and changed, showing something much older and darker. In the past, he was called Eros, and people thought he inspired love. But he actually inspired uncontrolled desire and infatuation that ate away at people without caring about the consequences. He didn't bring real love, but lust. Lust was a force that got in the way of reason and tempted people. The scene changed, again, and a deep crimson color filled my view. Roses, soft as velvet, have been in the hands of lovers for hundreds of years. They were a sign of love all over the world, but Jesus showed me where they really came from. He said these weren't meant to represent purity or dedication. They were gifts for Venus, the goddess of immorality and desire that is separate from holiness. I saw people exchange these symbols without knowing how important they were because they were following a custom they had never thought about questioning. The world saw these things as beautiful, but their roots told a different story, one of greed and lies. After seeing that, I saw something even worse. The first celebrations of this day of love had nothing to do with loyalty, respect, or giving up something. In their purest form, they were random acts of chance, like a lottery where names were drawn to pair people up for short-term pleasure rather than to form ties of devoted love. Strangers were brought together by chance, and their bond only lasted as long as the event did. There wasn't any real love here. All that was there was an echo of the chaos that used to be Lupercalia. Jesus made it clear that this was not how I understood love. Love isn't just about one day. Love isn't about making money off of it. Love means making a promise every day and following my rules. He showed me ways of looking at the Bible that I had never fully understood before. God thought that love was about following rules, helping others, and staying spiritually pure. Don't be unequally yoked with people who don't believe what the Apostle Paul said. I knew right then. What everyone thought was love and romance was actually a fake, a well-dressed shadow of something much older and darker. Love was never meant to be random, based on shaman practices, or tied to short-lived passion. As Jesus always meant, love was something bigger and more holy. It was time to know the truth. Then Jesus started to give a list of 10 very important reasons why Christians shouldn't celebrate Valentine's Day. Each reason was a spiritual arrow that cut through centuries of cultural lies. He told them to first understand the spiritual war that this holiday is about. He showed me pictures of how paganism gets into modern Christianity, not by openly rejecting it, but by giving into it in a sneaky way. Lupercalia wasn't just an old holiday. It was also a spiritual model that was passed down from generation to generation. At its heart, the festival stayed the same. It was still a celebration of fertility, sexual immorality, and human desire, though it was now dressed up as a celebration of love. The part about sexual immorality was especially upsetting. Jesus explained that Valentine's Day creates a spiritual atmosphere that favors sexual relationships before marriage. I saw statistics that showed unplanned pregnancies, mental trauma, and broken relationships were all caused by one day that is supposed to celebrate love, but only encourages short-term passion. Jesus said, "Your culture has turned love into a commodity. Love is not something that can be bought on a certain day. Love is a spiritual practice that you have to do every day." He used Bible verses to show me how God's idea of love is very different from how people around the world understand it. The book of 1 Corinthians 13 came to life. People who love each other are patient, kind, and don't remember wrongs, not as a business deal or a one-day show, but as love. The ties to the past got even more complicated. I learned about Venus, Cupid, and Juno, the Roman gods, and how all the traditions of Valentine's Day today have their roots in ancient pagan worship. The cherubic Cupid and the red roses, which are Venus's holy flower, are symbols of sexual desire, not pure love. He said that people think that changing a name changes the spiritual meaning, but calling a pagan rite holy doesn't mean that it is now holy. He talked about how the Roman Catholic Church had taken pagan beliefs and practices and used them in a planned way. This is called religious syncretism. Lupercalia wasn't taken away, it just got a new name. The love lottery turned into a drawing for saint names. Sexual practices were turned into romanticized courtship. The mental darkness was still there, but it was hidden. It helped me learn more about spiritual battle. Not only was it a holiday, but it was also about staying spiritually pure and being set apart as real Christians. Jesus said that many people think they are just enjoying love in a harmless way, but they are actually taking part in a spiritual trick that has been going on for hundreds of years. The business aspect was just as telling. Every year, Americans spend almost $20 billion on Valentine's Day, which is a huge amount of money and emotional energy on a holiday that has very troubled roots. On a mental level, every dollar spent was a way to honor these old pagan ideas. Then, Jesus showed me how Valentine's Day sets off a bad cycle of emotional demands that could hurt me spiritually. He told them to look more deeply into the psychological reasons behind this holiday. I saw how the holiday affects people's feelings in complex ways. Women feel ignored if they don't get gifts, and men feel like they need to make money to be accepted. The whole thing was a masterful work of spiritual and emotional control, a way to make people feel inadequate, compare themselves to others, and love only when certain conditions are met. Jesus made it clear that this is not love. This intense experience was made up. He explained what these mental changes meant on a deeper spiritual level. The holiday makes love dependent on behavior, which goes against God's love that doesn't depend on anything. Every heart-shaped chocolate and red rose is now a transaction, a moment of emotional currency that has nothing to do with a real spiritual relationship. The religious point of view became very clear. Corinthians says that love is gentle, kind, and doesn't remember wrongs. Valentine's Day, on the other hand, makes people think about who gave the best gift, who got the most attention, and who showed love in the most dramatic way. Jesus told them, "My children are being spiritually malnourished by a system that turns the most sacred human emotion into a commodity." The discoveries about spiritual alternatives were just as strong. Jesus showed me the 7 biblical holidays listed in Leviticus 23. These are celebrations that show how God plans to save the world. These were important spiritual events, not staged dramatic shows for money. I saw how these ancient holidays linked people to a bigger spiritual story. Passover shows how to be saved. Pentecost shows that God has given us heavenly power. Unlike Valentine's Day, which is mostly about acting, like you care, each event is a deep spiritual experience. It became even clearer that the economy was being manipulated. Love had become a multi-billion-dollar business thanks to corporations. The average American spends almost $20 billion a year on fake signs of love instead of real connections. Jesus said that every gift we buy is a small spiritual act that we give up. It became painfully clear what the symbols meant. The whole holiday is a carefully planned spiritual trap. Then Jesus showed me how traditions are passed down from one generation to the next, carrying spiritual DNA that most people don't even realize they have. He said that every celebration is a gift, a spiritual heritage that not many people understand. I saw spiritual blindness that went back generations. Parents pass down customs without thinking about where they came from. Children learn cultural practices like spiritual algorithms that can't be seen, but they never understand the deeper metaphysical meanings. The ties to the past turned into a complicated web of spiritual control. From the time of Nimrod to the time of Pan, from Roman fertility rituals to current commercial celebrations, Valentine's Day has been a spiritual lie. Jesus stressed that changing the name doesn't change the spiritual core. Changing the name of a pagan rite doesn't make its main goal more holy. He talked about how spiritual powers use cultural practices to control people. Valentine's Day wasn't just a harmless holiday. It was a clever spiritual trick, meant to keep people from connecting with God in a real way. It became very clear that there was a psychological war going on. The spiritual forces behind the holiday took away from the idea of consistent, pure love by making one day of performative love. People were taught that business deals, not daily commitment and sacrifice, are better ways to show love. Jesus said that love is not a thing. In a spiritual sense, love is a daily practice. I saw how the holiday made people feel wrong about themselves. The stress of having to act, meet social expectations, and show love through material things were all spiritual traps meant to keep people focused on shallow ways of connecting. The biblical view stood out as a stark difference. The Bible says that love is gentle, kind, and doesn't remember wrongs. Valentine's Day, on the other hand, made love more like a transaction. Who gave the best gift, who got the most attention, and who showed the most affection. Then Jesus showed me Valentine's Day's spiritual ecosystem, which is a complicated web of spiritual, economic, and cultural connections that most people don't see. My spiritual vision grew, showing me more levels of spiritual dynamics that are linked. It wasn't just about one holiday. It was about how people constantly hurt their spirituality through cultural practices that seem harmless. Jesus stressed how important it was to understand how spiritual structures work. Cultural customs aren't made up on the spot. They're intentional spiritual constructs meant to keep people from connecting with God directly. He said that spiritual battle is carried out through subtle cultural mechanisms. Systemic spiritual trickery is going on, but people don't realize it because these practices seem normal. The discoveries went beyond analyzing history. I saw how these traditions produce spiritual environments that keep people from connecting with each other, replacing real love with fake acts of love. In the Bible, on the other hand, love was shown to be a bold force for change. Not a business deal, but a daily spiritual practice of unwavering dedication, selflessness, and real connection. After that, Jesus led me to a deeper knowledge of spiritual manipulation that went far beyond a single holiday. The teachings were like surgery. They cut cultural practices apart with divine accuracy. He said that normalization is how spiritual deceit works. People follow customs without questioning what they mean at their core. I saw how complex the history of cultural behaviors is. Valentine's Day wasn't a one-time event. It was a complex spiritual process that had been a part of how people behaved for generations. Each group had a secret set of rules for spiritual compromise that were passed down from one generation to the next. The economic design turned into a case study that taught us a lot. Corporations had expertly turned human feeling into a thing that could be measured. Love turned into a market-driven experience, with multi-billion-dollar businesses carefully shaping people's feelings through carefully crafted marketing stories. Biblical views gave us a radical option. Divine love wasn't a transactional experience. It was a whole spiritual practice that required unwavering dedication, complete honesty, and acceptance no matter what. Jesus showed how spiritual rulers plan the rules of culture and custom. These events are not happening by chance. They are planned attempts to keep people from connecting spiritually. He told them to look at how cultural practices produce spiritual ecosystems, which show invisible energetic networks that most people don't notice. It became clear what the symbolic language meant. Every piece of cultural item had spiritual messages built into it. Giving gifts is a way to communicate your feelings, with Cupid standing for manipulative desire and red roses for sexualized faith. Then Jesus talked about how the holiday makes fake emotional landscapes. Women who feel unworthy if they are not recognized. Men who feel pressured to show love for no reason. The whole structure is designed to make people feel emotionally weak. He said that business deals can't be used to measure love. A real relationship goes beyond what people expect. People often get the stories of the saints wrong. The real Saint Valentine, a complicated person whose story isn't always clear. The Church's tendency to make people seem almost holy goes against basic spiritual ideas about having a direct relationship with God. Jesus warned that honoring human mediators builds spiritual walls instead of bridges. Biblical love was a novel. Model, it was unconditional, selfless, and life-changing. It's not a one-day show. It's a daily spiritual practice of real human interaction. Worshipping through old pagan rituals is basically at odds with what God wants. There is a secret story of compromise and distraction in the spiritual DNA of every celebration. The sneakiest way to trick someone spiritually is not to rebel openly, but to slowly become normal. Valentine's Day was a great example of how to compromise your spiritual beliefs without being too obvious about it. The holiday is so ingrained in our culture that its troubled roots are hard to see. Jesus showed the complex way that spiritual invasion works. Cultural customs aren't just random events. They're planned ways to keep people from connecting with God in a real way. Every heart-shaped ornament and every commercialized way of showing love turned into a small tradition that led people astray spiritually. He said that normalization is the most effective way to trick people spiritually. People give up their spiritual insight when they accept something without questioning it. I saw how customs are passed down from one generation to the next, like spiritual codes that can't be seen. Parents teach cultural habits to their kids without realizing it, and each time they do it again, it creates deeper spiritual problems. Children pick up on these habits without realizing what they mean on a deeper level. The divine view changed how people understood the world. Every Valentine's Day party wasn't just one moment. It was a complex flow of spiritual energy, carrying on old rituals that were meant to keep people from experiencing real divine love. Jesus showed people the deep spiritual celebrations written about in the Bible. These were events that actually linked people to the story of God. These weren't performances for money, they were spiritual events that changed people. Then Jesus showed me the deep meaning of the 7 biblical festivals, showing me how they were like a heavenly roadmap for spiritual communication. Each holiday showed us more about how God was working in our lives. The trip started with Passover, which stands for freedom and redemption and reminds us of God's power to set us free. After the yeasted bread, the need for spiritual cleansing was shown, telling us to get rid of the old in our hearts and welcome the new. Next was first fruits, a celebration of the rising and fresh starts that gave people hope for change and renewal. As we got closer to Pentecost, I felt spiritually strong and powerful. The Holy Spirit gave me strength and a sense of purpose. The Festival of Trumpets sounded, waking me up to a prophetic call to action that told me to pay close attention to God's words. On the Day of Atonement, I had a deep spiritual reunion and understood how important it is to turn away from sin and get back on track with God. When we finally got to Tabernacles, I felt God's deep presence, which reminded me of how He lives inside each of us. These festivals were more than just times on a calendar. They were real experiences that helped me connect with God more deeply. Each holiday was a deep spiritual trip, which was very different from Valentine's Day, which is mostly about showing off. As the end of my spiritual journey approached, Jesus' last word became crystal clear. He said this isn't about killing love. This is about getting to the heart of love. When it was in its perfect form, love wasn't a show for money. There was not a single day when they had to do certain romantic things. Love was a spiritual practice that had to be done every day. It meant accepting everyone without conditions, being completely honest, and giving up everything for others. Jesus said, "My children have been tricked over and over again. They've swapped real spiritual relationship for emotional transactions that are just for show." The revelation was not an accusation, but a call to spiritual awakening, to see through societal conditioning and go beyond it. I woke up in a hospital room when I became aware again. The profound spiritual discovery I'd had made the hypothermia that almost killed me seem like a distant memory. I knew that the point of my life had changed. I was no longer just a professional nutritionist. As a messenger, it was my job to show people the spiritual meanings behind traditional practices that most people never think about. The NDE story wasn't meant to scare people. It was meant to free them. A call to look deeper than cultural practices on the surface and understand the spiritual settings that shape human experience. Share what you've learned, Jesus' last words, kept playing over in my mind, not as a warning, but as a realization. There was a deep spiritual journey waiting for those who were ready to listen. It was a chance to break free from spiritual limitations passed down from generation to generation and embrace a more authentic, life-changing understanding of divine love.